Morning, everyone. Hope you're having a good time in Lisbon. I'm here today to talk about Django, HTMX. First, a quick intro about myself. I'm Lucas. I'm from Porto, Portugal. I currently work at CheckSec, maintaining several Django applications. I have more than 5 years of experience with Django and 3 with HTMX. I've developed several applications in production with these technologies for various markets such as education, real estate, and event management. So in the case you don't know what HTMX is, it's a JavaScript library, although we are on a Python conference, that allows you to do any HTTP request from any page element. It expects HTML instead of JSON. It's used in a declarative way, so inside HTML templates. And it's gaining traction in several stacks, such as Django, Go, and Laravel. So why do I use HTMX? Three main factors. First, simplicity. I've always worked on small teams. Everyone on the team needs to account for the entire scope of the application. And with even a small SPA, it brings a lot of complexity. Next, because I love Django. Django is an all batteries included framework. Provides excellent tooling. It has everything you need to build a complete application. And using an SPA framework such as React or Angular means that you need to exit the Python ecosystem and build functionality that sometimes Django provides you for free with other tools that probably aren't so good. Finally, productivity, because I can iterate faster, I can deliver faster, and I can control both the presentation and the business layer. So especially for small projects, that's a huge productivity boost. So first, let's look at what HTMX offers in contrast to a regular SPA. With HTMX, you can provide UI and UX improvements for your app. So a small blog, you can add like dynamic content easily, or you can implement the look and feel of an SPA without using JavaScript, or at least very few JavaScript. This last concept is what creates a new type of application, an HDA, or hypermedia-driven application, where most of the state is on the server. And your API provides both data and operations at the same time, usually through HTML, because you have controls inside HTML, such as links, buttons, etc. So here is a quick chart to display the differences. An SPA manages both business and UI state at all times. The API usually only provides data. An HDA only needs to maintain business logic on the server, and the UI state is usually maintained by simple JS libraries or plain HTML. And as stated before, the API provides both data and operations. So at the same time, SPAs require serialization. They are good for high interactivity, but they require a lot more boilerplate and usually rely on high number of dependencies. While an HDA may or may not work for high interactivity, doesn't require serialization because you're using Django templates, as a more direct approach for simple features, especially things like root, and favors less dependencies and even no build if you're a fan of that approach. So we're going to take a tour through the main sections of a Django app, first with views. A good way to architect Django app, or in this case views, using this approach is to use a pattern known as lazy loading or trigger on load, where you trigger a part of the page when it loads from a unique endpoint. You build views as single responsibility entities that load parts of the UI. And your view will work as an adapter that couples the presentation and the business logic. So even if you replicate that section along your app, you'll always ensure that the internal behavior works in every place of your app. So as stated, you can move the partials around. We have here an example of a project list view. Instead of rendering an entire page, you just render the list itself as a template. You insert that HTML bit into your template, and it will load just that section. So you have part of your UI isolated to that endpoint. So this is how it will look like. So a view that only displays parts of the UI. If you have more complex UIs, you can separate your UI into different views and load them independently. Here's an example of a dashboard where you have a project detail, a customer stats, project list. All of these are just separate endpoints. Each one has their own business logic, their own responsibility, so they all work independently and internally they should not break. This is how the dashboard would look like. So you're basically just loading parts of the UI into the main template. And this is a very basic 30-minute demo created to show how it would look like. Next, favor class-based views over function-based views. You have a lot of boilerplate that Django provides. Using function-based views loses some of the edge that Django provides you. Also, knowing the inner workings of the mixins is a huge productivity boost. Not only the mixins you already know from Django, but also creating your own mixins to generalize some behaviors such as state management, permission checking, so you can share them along the app. CRUD. Usually on a regular MPA, you can only do CRUD using different views, and you can do delete or put or patch in a regular form or anchor. With HTMX, you can do it. So you can turn a regular Django view into a DRF view set and do all the CRUD operations into a single view, which streamlines a lot of basic functionality. You can build your own, which is recommended just for training and to know how Django works. But you can also use packages such as Neapolitan that provide all that functionality. Next, let's look at templates. A good approach for heavy templating usage is to use component-driven design. First, let's take a small look at some minor concepts that are new to the Django ecosystem. Components are a new approach that tries to address the limitations of the Django templating language. By using components, you make them easier to read. You decouple the logic of the components and allow more usability. You can think of components as unitary, reusable, and self-contained elements. These are some examples, such as product item, paginator, sidebar, header, etc. And partials can be just components coupled together. So compose UI sections that have some semantic value, such as action sidebar, related products, profile menu. So any part of your UI that has some value to the user. If you're currently using Django, there's a lot of solutions to address this limitation. You have Django Cotton, Sleepers, Jinja-X. Django 5 also has simple block tag, which uses the DTL syntax, which we'll see maybe not the best option. Django Cotton is my favorite option right now because it uses markup very similar to HTML, allows you to pass complex objects, multiple name slots, and dynamic component inclusion. So if you need to know which component to render from a value, dynamic value from the database, you can just pass the value and Cotton will resolve to the component you need. So here we have a very simple example, a product item element. As you can see, the right side is how you're going to put it inside your template. So it looks like HTML tag, very simple, can have multiple slots, and those values will just get filled in the left side template. So by having a component structure, you maintain UI consistency, standardized styling choices, and maximize reusability, which is one of the Django standards. A good pattern to create a good structure is to have a two-tiered component structure, where you have abstract components and specific or concrete components. You can think of abstract components are basic and extendable skeletons, such as a layout. You don't have any context associated with them, so a table can be any table, a badge, a menu, a toast, a dropdown, while a specific component is usually filled or bound to a data model. So for example, user table, product table, status badge, error toast. And if you have a good set of abstract components, you're building your design system. So here we have an example of what can be considered a base table or an abstract table. You style it however you want. And when you need to provide any data to it, you just create an extended version of that component. As you can see, it inherits from the base table with the values and the actions that that data model provides. And that's the result. Also, very simple design. So if you're already using HTMX, how can we improve the usage? First, with the closest tag, this is a keyword that's rarely used, but it works by identifying the ancestor. Usually you put in the Ajax target a target that you want to swap. So in this case, it's usually CSS selector, class and ID. By using a closest keyword, you're usually finding the relative ancestor, which is useful, for example, if you're clicking on an item inside a table, you want to replace the entire table, it's easier to do closest table than just add a complex ID that is specific for your use case. It's very less error prone and avoids complex naming, which in apps like this is not very good. Next, provide feedback to the user. This is rules that apply here, but also apply to SPAs. You should always use a spinner or some type of indicator. Display errors by catching JavaScript events that are sent by HTMX. Use the new view transitions API for page shifting. That's just a toggle on or off feature. And disable elements, or at least catch the request and cancel them when you already have an event in a request in flight for that target. Next, if you're using Django, there's a lot of toolings. Like I said, the component packages. There's also partial packages to overcome the template limitations. Django HTMX is a good package to streamline the usage inside your Django code base. You also have Alpine or HyperScript for small JS interactivity, which is very useful. In terms of security, you should always use the escape.js template filter when you're including values inside JavaScript or HTML attributes. Serialize JSON data if you need, which is rare, inside Alpine statements. And sanitize all your HTML generated by the user using a whitelist-based package. If you need to request full pages, so for example, when you load a partial and the user refreshes the page, it's the browser doing the request and not HTMX. So you'll need to display a full page. You can use a package such as Django template partials. There's also a good snippet that allows you to have an empty template, base template, just for partials, and an empty base template with all the assets you need, usually JavaScript, Tailwind, etc. You should ensure that the URL is pushed to the history only when you can provide full pages, and set the very header to Ajax request to avoid errors on browser caching. Next is an approach for hypermedia or JavaScript. This is for related resources. So let's say you have a table that when you click on an action, it opens a modal or a related element that is not displayed when the page is shown. Some people like to toggle it with JavaScript. Some people just like to wait for it and request it from the server. My take here is to, if you have static data such as a confirm action, just include it and toggle it with HTML or JavaScript. If you have dynamic data such as a search input that shows a dropdown, you'll need to fetch it from the server, so wait for that moment to fetch the data from and display the item from the server. When you have multiple partials, so more complex UIs, you need to maintain the state in sync. We'll look at a small example here. Here, this is a mock-up of a UI where you can edit products, list products on the left side. If you edit the product's name, you'll see that the form will replace with a replaced value. But unless you target also the left side, you'll get stale state because the list hasn't updated the product name. This is a very common thing when you start working with these technologies, and we're going to look at some ways of mitigating these issues. First, you can extend the swap area, as we talked about. If you can request the list and include it on the template, it's useful if the elements are closely related, such as that example. So you have a list of products and a product form, or have simple dependencies. What you should not do is edit your form view to just display the list if something happens or if the user edited, because that removes the single responsibility principle. And we want everything to be decoupled and split up so you can reuse it along the app. You can use out-of-band swaps. This is an HTMX feature that allows your response to signal that multiple parts of it will go to multiple places of the UI. This is useful when you have parts of the UI with no dependencies or very little, such as you change the state on a header or a sidebar. And finally, the trickiest one is to dispatch an event to, okay, I've changed data in this place, tell all the other parts of the UI that you need to reload from the server. This requires some kind of state management. With some hypermedia technologies, such as DataStar, you can do things like server-side events. You can do server-side events also with HTMX, but that's a more complicated approach. Next, how to use HTML in a good way, especially for these kinds of apps. So take the HTML first approach. So as stated yesterday on the accessibility talk, always use semantic elements such as section, main, aside. This is good because divs everywhere don't identify parts of your UI. With this, you can target or swap parts of your UI just by targeting as main or aside or header. You should always use native HTML elements over JavaScript libraries. So dialog, details, input type search, input type color, they give a lot of functionality for little to no JavaScript. Also, web APIs. You can do very simple drag and drop interfaces with just HTMX. You don't need draggable JS or any other libraries. And if you need to store data in your markup, use the data attributes and the dataset property. If you need to do client-side interactivity, which eventually you will, the best options are to use Alpine.js or Hyperscript. Alpine.js is good if you require some JS libraries to use, create declarative wrappers with Alpine.js. If you have non-trivial client-side interactivity or very high data-oriented reactivity, you can just create a web component using your favorite front-end frameworks such as React, export it, and use it as HTML tag. So this is a scale that shows if your app is good for this type of architecture. So you should have an increase in client-side interactivity, use less high interactivity, and you'll see that the scale adjusts to the required usages. So if your app has a lot of small interactivity, you'll use a lot of Alpine.js statements, very few custom directives, and even very few web components. If it doesn't scale like this, it's probably best to use an SPA or other types of applications. This also helps by maintaining a balance in your code between locality of behavior and separation of concerns. So you want simple functionality, easy to read in your HTML markup, complex interactivity, things that take some time to grasp, to be in its own file, in its usually JS file, and even if it's even more complicated, use proper tooling such as React or Svelte. So is HTMX a good fit for your current or next application? Yes, mostly. If you have a CRUD-heavy application, if you need a lot of, don't need a lot of business logic on the client, and you don't do a lot of DOM manipulation, it's a perfect option and it should save you a lot of time. But if you need real-time collaboration, offline functionality, or heavy client-side state, then you're probably better with a React app or other options in the front-end world. Even if your app has just small sections that require that heavy client-side state, you can use the hybrid approach. So build a web component with that section or that page. This is very similar to what micro front-ends and front-end islands do. So you can have a section that is very high interactivity, just load from an HTML element and then communicate through a JSON API. And the rest of the app can be just regular HTMX. So if you're trying to learn HTMX and the hypermedia way, here are some quick resources to learn. The hypermedia systems is the holy grail of this type of architecture. I recommend for everyone to read. It's very light read, even if you don't like books. It's a big book with big letters, so it's easy to read. It gives you an historical overview. So if you started to developing like front end with React, this helps you understand what came before and how it works. It has both technical and practical examples, and like I said, helps a lot with the mental model change that you need after developing SPAs. Next is the PyHat repo. This is a repository that has all sorts of resources, patterns, and examples, not only for Django, but Flask, FastAPI, and other types of web Python frameworks. It covers a lot of topics such as templating, architecture, has a lot of library snippets, so it's a good resource to learn. And finally, the HTML first website. This is a good example of how to approach UI implementation. So if you can build it in HTML, build it with HTML. If not, go to CSS, and if not, go to JavaScript. The ideas and the concepts in this website are very good to simplify your workflow. So what's next after HTMX? There's already a lot of other ideas. Unpoly is a older experience that works similar. Datastar is a framework that works mostly with server-side events. And there's also Django Unicorn that tries to mix HTMX with Django built in. You have functionality now that works only on very recent browsers, but allows you to move complex objects on the DOM, complex nodes, without losing state. So you can move like a YouTube video, and the YouTube video will keep playing, can drag and drop without any issues. But the most important thing is the stability as a feature. So the idea is that if you start learning or working with HTMX now, the code you'll write in 5, 10, 15 years should work without any issues, and it will scale without any problems, because HTMX will now just have updates for security and no new features. And for people that come from the front-end world, that's a lesson, a hard truth that they learn. That's all for today. Thank you so much. Have a great conference.